Hello! So I have a very special video today because I'm not alone, although I kind of am. So recently I went to London and YouTube Space and met with Olly and Benny Lewis, who I've met before, but we never actually made a thing together before. So we made a thing, and then me and Olly were like, why have we never made a thing? Let's make a thing. So we decided to make a video together, but we don't live in the same place. So how do we do this? Through the wonders of technology. So a little while back I asked you, if you're on my email list, for a question for Olly Richards of I Will Teach You a Language, and we picked 5 at random, and I asked these questions to Olly. So are you ready? Question number 1. Question number 1 is from Maureen, who says, Olly, if you start a new language, how do you ensure you don't get rusty in your existing languages? Olly?
Okay, so this is like the perennial polyglot problem. As you learn new languages, how do you avoid forgetting old ones? I find that there are 2 types of languages for me. The first type is languages that I learn to speak very well. So for me, for example, Portuguese would be an example. Once you learn a language to a kind of B2, C1 level, and you're very comfortable speaking in most situations, what I find is that the level in that language never really goes down. You know, you can go for years without speaking it and it stays the same. So in that sense, like my stronger languages, I don't really have to worry too much about forgetting them. I just practice them whenever I get the opportunity, and that's enough. Now, the second kind of language is the language that I never really got that far in. So for example, in my case, Arabic would be a good example. I got to a kind of A2 conversational level, but it's not enough for it to really sink in and become part of me, part of my personality. Languages like that are very much at risk of disappearing or you losing them. So what you have to do is simply to dedicate regular time to practicing them. And I don't keep up all my languages. It's not really possible. But what I do with languages that I do want to maintain but are not at a high level yet is I will simply have a lesson once a week, some kind of regular opportunity to speak and practice, and that's enough.
Thank you, Olly. I think it's a really important point that you make there about how far you get in the language depending on how easy it is to maintain and to just not let it get rusty. I think that's really crucial. Thanks for that. Question 2 is from Monique. And Monique asks, as a language teacher, how should I go about teaching students I meet only once a week? Very good question. Olly?
Now this is a great question and relevant to every single language teacher out there. The basic problem is that in most language schools you don't meet your students very, very often. Okay? And yet we know that in order to learn to speak a language well, you have to actually speak that language a lot. So if your students' only contact with the language is the lesson that they have with you once a week, you've got a difficult decision to make, because even if you spend that lesson every week practicing speaking and helping them to speak, that's not going to be enough for them to really learn the language. So what I'm tempted to do in a lot of cases is to think, okay, my job as a teacher is to encourage my students to go out there and find the opportunities, create the opportunities to practice speaking, such that when they come to their weekly lesson with me, the best thing that I can do is give rather than just be like a sounding board for speaking and practice, is actually do what I'm best at and help teach the student, get them to talk, maybe correct their mistakes, highlight areas of weaknesses, things that they can work on. So that is probably the best approach. The problem is, though, it doesn't meet students' expectations, because students want to come to class and they want to speak a lot of the time. So there's no easy answer to this one, but as a teacher, the best possible gift you can give your student is empowerment and the ability and the mindset to go out there and use their language as much as possible. If you can do that, you'll be doing a great service for your students.
I love this. In fact, I couldn't agree with you more. I think, and we spoke about this recently, so we did a podcast episode together on the I Will Teach You a Language podcast, right? And we talked about language education, and I think it's really important that when you're teaching languages, you're not just doing vocabulary, grammar, words. You're actually also kind of telling people, this is how you do this thing. So you teach people how to learn a language, not just what. I think that's really, really valuable. Question number 3 is from Lucian. How do you memorize vocabulary effectively? Olly, any ideas?
This is a difficult one. Learning and memorizing vocabulary is the biggest challenge that you face as someone who's learning a new language. And yet it's really hard. And we all feel like our memories could be better. We learn things, we forget them. In my experience, the question of learning vocabulary really depends on the language that you're learning and your mother tongue. So, for example, when I learned Romance languages like French and Spanish and Portuguese, I found that just by speaking a lot and communicating a lot in the language, reading things, and just exposing myself to different things in the language, my vocabulary would grow in quite a natural way, and I didn't need to use any special techniques like flashcards to memorize vocabulary. However, when I then went on to learn Asian languages and Arabic, for example, languages are very, very different from English. I found that I didn't have enough hooks, didn't have enough things to hold on to when I'm learning these new words. There's too much distance between what I know and these words that I have to learn. And so I found that with these languages, I had to start using techniques and some more kind of artificial ways to remember vocabulary. And for me, I see it in 3 stages. Okay, the first part is that you actually need to bring attention to the vocabulary you're going to learn. So if you see a word you want to memorize, you have to say, okay, I am going to memorize this word. I'm going to bring my attention to it and say, okay, I've chosen to learn this word. That's the first step. Often we just kind of look at something and say, and hope we remember it. No, you've got to actually take a decision to remember the word. The second part is repetition, and seeing a word once is not enough. You've got to see it many, many times, and so that can be receptively, so that can be listening or reading the word many times, and it can be in a spoken way, so actually using the word many times. Either way, the vocabulary that you want to memorize, you've got to use it or hear it a lot. And then the third part to this is actually trying it out and using it. For most people, simply learning vocabulary in books and passively isn't going to be enough. Or at the very least, when you actually come to speak with people, you're not going to have access to it. It's not going to be here, it's not going to be on the tip of your tongue. So what you need to do is make sure that you're recycling everything that you're learning. Okay, so that you've decided to learn that word, you've seen it a bunch of times, and then you actually use it in speech as well, so that you are trying it out in conversation. If you do a combination of these 3 things, that's the way that you're going to give this vocabulary the most chance of actually sticking.
I found the same thing actually, Ollie, with learning European languages and then learning Asian languages, that idea of less hooks. I really like the idea you said about less hooks, because when you learn one European language, especially when it's in the same family, and then another, and it just kind of is easy. You don't spend much time learning vocabulary in the sort of traditional sense that you would expect with tools and flashcards, etc. But with Asian languages, I found there is less of a link, and so it does take more effort. So yeah, really, really valuable point. I think it definitely depends on the language you're learning. Question number 4 is from Ian, who asks, what sort of goals do you set for language learning, Ollie?
I've always found goal setting in language learning to be really, really tricky, but I think part of that comes from the fact that when I first started learning languages, my first 4 or 5 languages, I learned in a very natural way, and so I wasn't used to setting artificial goals. I would simply start learning and then go through the kind of procedure that I've developed over time, and I kind of had confidence that would work for me. But recently, I think because my life has changed, I've got a lot busier, I have less time to devote to languages, I have found that goal setting has really helped me continue and keep it up. And there's a few different ways you can do this, but the real key is to make it as tangible as possible. And that's not easy, because to become fluent in a language is not a good goal. It's a good aspiration, but it's not a good goal, because you can't break that down into simple, tangible steps. It just takes too long. So the kind of goals, I'll give you a few examples of the kind of goals that I've been setting recently. I recently went to Thailand, and I wanted to spend a couple of weeks learning Thai, because my main aim was basically to go to Thailand and not to have to speak English. I love Thailand, I go there often, but I've never learned the language. So I set myself a goal there that I would study for 2 weeks or 20 hours, and I would aim to get to a point where I didn't need English. So I could go around Thailand and I could do all kind of touristy things without using English, only using Thai. That was my goal, and that was effective, I think, because I didn't aim for anything more than that, because I would have just been disappointed from only 2 weeks. And I actually recorded every day of that journey in separate videos and put it on YouTube, which was really, really, really fun to do. A goal that I'm working on right now is I'm trying to learn Chinese characters, and I've given myself 3 months to learn 1,500 Chinese characters. And the reason I picked that was simply because in 3 months I'm going to Hong Kong, and I've got a book which teaches you 1,500 Chinese characters. So I think often these goals are kind of arbitrary. It could either the thing that you decide could go either way, it could change and nothing really matters. But I think what's important is that you choose something and you stick to it. And that could be a time goal, so you can say, right, I'm going to do as much of X in 2 weeks or 2 months. Or it could be a quantity goal. So you could say, okay, I want to learn to read 1,000 Chinese characters in X amount of time. Or it could be a kind of a product goal, such as I want to learn to speak Thai, basic Thai in 2 weeks. Those product goals are kind of hard because there's no accounting for whether you reach the goal or not. But that's my kind of thought process about how I go about setting goals in a language.
Thank you, Ollie. I really like that distinction you make between goal and aspiration, and I think that's really key, because it's okay to have aspirations, but it's also good to recognise that you need goals to help you reach that thing you aspire to. That's kind of like the big end goal. And finally, question number 5 from Mai, who asks, I have some difficulty with pronunciation in French, so I think it's hard to listen to French conversation. It's very fast. What tips do you have for pronunciation?
So when it comes to pronunciation and intonation in a language, basically, your accent, how you speak, I don't really have any specific techniques, but there are definitely a couple of things that I make sure to do. Now, the first thing is always, right from the beginning, to make sure I'm working with a teacher or someone who can give me specific feedback on how I'm speaking. So when I recently learned Thai, for example, I had a teacher and we spent a lot of time looking at the tones, the pronunciation of certain letters and sounds. And so you've got to make sure that you get the pronunciation, the basic building blocks of the language right from the start. Now, beyond that, once you can actually pronounce the sounds in the language accurately, then it's a question of accent and intonation and basically how native-like do you sound. And, obviously you've got to spend a lot of time with the language. So the more time you spend listening, the better. The more time you spend with people, the better. But really the only way to develop a native-like or a very effective accent in a language is to really integrate with the community and actually carry out your life in that language. And the reason is that, there's so many details and nuances in an accent in a language. There's just simply no way that you can learn that in an intellectual way. Exercises and activities are just not going to get you there. The things that native speakers really appreciate and the things that help you really have an effective accent when talking with a native speaker are the things that you learn instinctively by simply spending time with them. So, you really have to look for friends, people you can meet socially or spend time in the country, something like that, over an extended period. That's really the only way to develop that effective accent. There are things you can do to help. Obviously, a lot of listening, shadowing, things like that will definitely help you, but it's not going to be, the only way to really get there is by becoming part of a community where you can interact with people in an authentic way.
I like that you say about working with someone. I think this is really, really crucial when it comes to pronunciation, getting a good accent, etc. Because on your own, there's only so much you can do. But when it comes to things like that, you do need someone to bounce off for feedback. So yeah, really, really great point, Ollie. Ollie, thank you for hopping over and answering those questions over here at Lindsay Does Languages. And I did the same thing over on Ollie's channel. So you should definitely go and check that out. You can follow Ollie on YouTube at I Will Teach You a Language. Ollie also writes a rather nifty blog at, yes, you've guessed it, iwillteachyoualanguage.com. And if you've come here from Ollie's channel, hello, welcome, hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, bonjour. You're more than welcome to hang around a little bit, watch some old videos, and of course subscribe so you never miss a future video. Ollie, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, and I will see you all very soon. Cheers, bye.